Welcome, movie fans. Thanks for joining us for episode 102 of Reading Between the Reels, the premier podcast of casting unknowns as iconic characters they'll play until they're 90. If you're a new listener, we're so glad you found us. If you've been enjoying the show, please subscribe and review us on iTunes or Spotify. You can also support the show by posting on your socials and joining our Facebook group. I'm Craig Dickinson, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Justin Eldon. Corey's out tonight, but should be back next time. So, Justin, I'm so glad you're here. How's it going?
It's going great. Hello. And yes, I do prefer yellow spandex. Not me. I don't I don't wear the yellow spandex. I mean, I prefer I was going to say my men, but I mean my superheroes in yellow. I like Wolverine in yellow spandex.
There's so many ways I could go. Look at those PJs.
But not too form-fitting. Just yellow.
Yeah.
Like Deadpool yellow. Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, sneak preview. We're talking about X-Men tonight. But before we get into that, we started our new segment last week, and we're going to pick that up again. Justin, what have you been watching this week? What movies and TV shows or what have you?
So a couple weeks ago, saw Alien Romulus. Fantastic film. Huge fan of the Alien franchise. So I've been doing a rewatch of all the Alien movies. And they are all... some of them are really good.
Fair.
A couple of them. I'd say mostly Alien Resurrection is the one that I struggle with. I happen to like the rest of them. Even Alien 3 I know is not a strong one in the franchise, but I like Alien 3. Not a fan of Alien 2. Not a fan of Bill Paxton.
We've talked about that, yeah.
I know. Bill, I can't. Game over, man. I can't do it. But yeah, I've been watching a lot of Alien and digesting a lot of Alien lore. It's been a good watch.
Well, that's fun.
What have you been watching?
It took me a second. I'd forgotten briefly, but this last weekend I was looking for a sci-fi movie that I could watch with my son that he hadn't seen, and I introduced him to Equilibrium.
Ooh,
with Christian Bale, which I had not
Discount
seen.
Matrix.
Yes, I had not seen it in forever. And Sean Bean dies in this movie. It's weird. Yeah, fantastic action, dystopian. I mean, it's kind of derivative of a lot of things. It's kind of The Matrix and The Giver, and it's 1984 and several other things. But great action. It's fun. Check your brain for 2 hours. So I enjoyed that quite a bit. Revisiting that film.
That movie actually has, for those of you that haven't seen it, spoiler free here. There is a class in their society called clerics, I believe. Is that what they're called? Clerics who study the best ways to mathematically dodge bullets. Is that, I haven't seen it in a while. Is that what it is?
Yeah, they've cataloged, I should say. That's the word I'm looking for. Every gunfight ever. And so they know where to stand and how to move and where people will, the odds of where the people will be. And so they can basically stand in the middle, dodge bullets, and they're returning fire and killing everybody. Yeah.
So that idea has helped my viewing of so many other movies where this week I also watched the 2014 The Kingsman. Mm-hmm. Which I don't super love, but I'm gonna watch the rest of them.
Yeah,
but that guy dodges so many bullets, and I'm just like, you know what? Maybe it's like Equilibrium. Maybe he learned how to, position himself in the best way to dodge bullets. I don't know. It helps with my headcanon on those why people are such bad shots in movies.
Yeah. There you go. So yeah, that was worth checking out. And then I followed that up with Anchorman, because I needed to kind of cleanse the palate, and that was fun.
This makes a lot of sense because you have been quoting Anchorman a lot recently.
20 years old that movie is now, which is just insane. So yeah, it's so funny.
Quick aside about that movie.
Yeah,
I almost died to that movie because I'm not even kidding. This is not hyperbole. I could not stop laughing at the fight scene.
Yes.
And I was in high school.
Speaking of fight scenes.
I could not breathe. I was worried. I saw a light.
I believe that. That seems legit. But we're not talking about Anchorman or Equilibrium or Alien movies even tonight. We're talking about X-Men from 2000. And this is the second film in our Marvel before the MCU series, following Blade from last time. And so, Justin, I'm going to start off with you. What are your overall thoughts on X-Men?
My overall thoughts are incredibly biased because I grew up watching this movie. This was like probably one of the first DVDs we owned in my family, and I watched it over and over and over again, and I freaking love this movie. In my brain, this movie, and I know it's not because we have other superhero movies before, but in my brain, this movie is like the start of modern day superhero movies. And I know like Blade came before technically, but like maybe I just missed the Blade train as a kid or something. I had never really seen Blade until recently. But yeah, this movie was it. It was like superhero movies had arrived. This was like speaking to my childhood. I was always like a huge X-Men fan as a kid. The 1992 series, I watched that on repeat constantly. I had all the action figures as a kid. I had all the comics as a kid. Like I was 100% an X-Men fan. So when this came out, I was like, yes, this is me. This is my identity. This is who I'm going to be for the rest of my life, is an X-Men fan. And I am happy to say, and I've seen it. I've probably seen this movie a dozen times, but it holds up. Like some of the effects obviously don't hold up as most effects don't from the early 2000s. But the acting, the world building, the characters, surprisingly, like Wolverine 24 years later is still the same Wolverine. Mm-hmm. Like he's had some obvious character growth, but he is still like true to that character. And I think that's pretty amazing how much Hugh Jackman got right the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And just I'll touch more on this later when we get to it, but all of the characters in here, in my mind, like when I think of live action Jean Grey, it is from this movie. Live action Cyclops, it's from this movie. Live action, Xavier, this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, I mean, darn, First Class has really good Xavier too. Still, this movie.
Yeah.
No, this movie is amazing to me. I love it with all my heart.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think there's a little bit of a distinction that we have to draw. I mean, Blade is obviously based on a Marvel property, but it didn't really wear its comic book origins on its sleeve in the way that this one did. This was kind of the first, like, hey, this is a Marvel comic movie, right? And Blade's an R-rated film. This is obviously this is not. So it's more family friendly and it's more geared toward a wider audience. The 4-quadrant thing. And so consequently, it is the first really, really big hit for Marvel. Blade made money and was a success. And of course, that's why they made more. But this one made back, almost 4 times its budget. So this was the thing that said, yes, we can actually make Marvel movies and make them successful. So yes, this in a different, it's like Blade kind of like punctured through a little bit, but then this was like this busted the door wide open. And then you get, some of the next things we have coming. We have Spider-Man and Hulk and Daredevil and such as. I'm coming down the line. So some things I was thinking of, I am really trying to, I've never watched the films in this order. I really am trying to watch it as if they belong in the same universe, even though they weren't designed that way, which I think is fun. And one of the things I think that this film and its sequels did really, really well was the X-Men universe is so huge that it works really well as kind of its own self-contained bubble. You don't really need anybody else to interact. But watching this through the lens of, hey, could Blade exist in a corner of this universe? Yeah, I totally think that Wesley Snipes could be out there killing vampires in another part of the country, and it wouldn't really affect what's going on. It's because he's in the shadows anyway. So I think that's kind of fun to think of it that way. And tonally, that they're not that different. Obviously, Blade's more violent and whatnot, but I could see how they would fit together. But the last thing I want to say is that this is a film, and I've used this lots of times talking to students and whatever, about character stand-ins. And I just love how much, speaking of Wolverine, that Wolverine is kind of the audience stand-in for this. And that you have this really natural way to bring the audience in who didn't know the X-Men, because everything has to be explained to him. He comes in and he has no idea about this universe other than, his own journey, but he doesn't know about the Brotherhood. He doesn't know about the X-Men. And so it's a very natural way to kind of let the audience know what's going on. And they use Wolverine brilliantly that way.
Yeah, I agree. Like there's a lot, and a little bit with Rogue too. Like Rogue is kind of the audience stand-in, and or maybe more so like it gives Rogue and Wolverine an opportunity to discuss exposition for the audience.
True.
But this movie so very quickly gets a lot of information out there. Like the opening credits, you have Xavier's voiceover of like the history of mutants and like where they came from and how they're kind of incorporated into this world. And it's not like creating some like fantasy world. It's like, this is the world you live in, but just now imagine like mutants started happening. Mm-hmm. And then we transition from that very quickly to like the tragic backstory of Magneto.
Yeah.
Which sets him up like immediately as a sympathetic figure, like anti-hero. Throughout this whole thing, I like even as a kid reading comics and like watching the 92 series, the animated series, you never felt like Magneto was a bad guy. You just kind of felt like him and Xavier ultimately have similar goals. They want like mutants to be accepted. They have very different ways of going about it, but it's such an interesting like tug of war that they have going on because they're not really willing to like mortally wound each other or kill each other, but they have like this mutual respect for each other as well as they're trying to constantly foil each other's plans. And I think you pick up on that very quickly. Like you understand Magneto so quickly. Like it spends more time on Magneto's backstory than it does Xavier's.
Oh yeah.
And seeing him as a child, like in the concentration camp and just seeing what he had to go through, you're just like, holy crap, like this guy, you feel for him. And you can see why he doesn't want a repeat of that situation with his new genetic family, I guess, like the mutants in general. I love that. That opening scene is so good. And it's good enough that they reused it almost shot for shot, and I think they even used parts of it in another X-Men film.
First Class, yeah.
Was it First Class? I knew it was one of those. I couldn't remember. Yeah. So good.
Yeah. No, there's a couple things about that. I absolutely agree that Magneto is super sympathetic and he's not a traditional bad guy. And I think we're kind of in a place now where a lot of times in film we've heard that, every villain is a hero of his own story and there's this deconstruction thing and we're supposed to have all the sympathetic villains and stuff. And, like that doesn't always work. I think most of the time it does not work actually. Whereas in this case, it really is a difference in philosophy more than it is a difference in morality. So watching that, I was also struck by that. I'm like, just how good, and the film does a great job of really establishing that they are legitimately friends. And there's little things about, about Cerebro and why he would know how to, combat. It's like, yeah, because he helped me build it. Like we're friends. I have been for decades. And the other thing, so I was going to kind of just lead right into cinematography because one of the first images that we see is, that giant lettering of Poland 1944. And you're immediately like brought into this world in a way that I remember being very surprised by. Like, why are we doing this? What's happening here? But then the imagery immediately is, Auschwitz. And we're like, okay, this is supposed to be a comic book movie, but it's in our world, like you mentioned, and not a good place of our world. This is going to be tragic.
Well, and you think of the other comic book movies that had come out previous to this. You have, some Batman films, you have some Superman films, you have the Blade films, and they're all very campy, right? They're not very serious. I mean, Blade is serious, but it's hard to take it seriously sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah, because it is fantasy too, right?
Yeah, but this is like, oh, we're starting with that. Okay, this tonally is very
Nazis
different.
At the beginning of our film,
there's Nazis and like they're not the funny kind. Hang on.
Yeah, it's not Hogan's Heroes. I know what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
I gotcha.
Whew. That's not what I meant. Not what I meant. No, Nazis are funny. I'm sure some had a sense of humor. Okay, I'm done talking. Where was I going with that? Anyway, it's a totally different movie, and there is a little bit of humor in this movie, but for the most part, it deals with like very real problems. Like there's a lot of like strains of like prejudice in this movie that I think a lot of people can connect to at any time and period. Like that is a common theme that I think everyone kind of shares all throughout history.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have specific things that you want to talk about for composition, color, cam work? I have a handful of things, but I wanted to give you first dibs on that.
Yeah, the thing I noticed the most is the very clear cut dynamic between the Brotherhood of Mutants, like Magneto's little crew, and then the X-Men. Like, you see Magneto's little crew, they're living in like some oceanside caves, or I mean, it's not really clear where that is, but they're living in caves. It's very dark, very drab. Clearly not a whole lot of order or like respect for one another. Like, they're kind of rude to one another. You got like Sabretooth like growls at Magneto. Magneto locks him in the cell and all that stuff. So a lot of dark, unorganized feelings there. And then you can contrast that with like Xavier's style. It's a well-lit, bright mansion. There's a clear hierarchy there. There's a clear order to things. And you can see it in the way they behave. And the way that mansion looks in comparison to those caves, visually, is kind of like reminiscent of almost like their leadership styles, where I think Magneto is in it. He's not doing it for Sabretooth. He's not doing it for Toad. He's not doing it for Mystique. And we see that in X-Men 3. He kind of just drops Mystique like a hot potato. He's not doing it for them. He's doing it like he's in a numbers game. He's like, I'm doing it for all mutants. Whereas Xavier is like, he's in it for the individual, as well as all mutants. But you can see that reflected in, I guess, how they surround themselves, which is fun.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well stated about the masses versus the individual. Because yes, obviously Charles cares about all mutants, but he does view them as individuals. Where, I mean, even that thing at the end with that device that's going to just make everybody mutants. It's like it literally is a numbers game at that point. Right, that's kind of his goal. But speaking of Magneto, one thing that I really, really enjoyed this time that I thought was just masterful is that reveal at the beginning where Charles and Magneto are in the hallway, and when they show Magneto showing his face, is that he's kind of on the right, and it's very much a close up. You can only see about 3/4 of his face, and he's darkened in the foreground on the right. And then you have Charles behind him, and it's out of focus as they're having this conversation. And I just saw a lot of symbolism in that. One is that Magneto is huge in that frame, and so it's kind of like it's very focused on him, right? It's the way he sees himself. And then Charles is out of focus behind him because he either can't or won't listen to what he has to say. Like he's there, he hears him, but the message is not going to get through. So I thought that was just a brilliant artistic way of kind of portraying the way that, Charles is trying to get through that fog to him, and he's not having any success.
Well, and they can do so, like this movie kind of had a heavy load because there are so many characters that you have to introduce, and you don't have to worry too much about backstory because with most other superheroes, it's like, well, how did they get their power? Oh, they're an alien from another planet or gamma radiation. This is like you're born with it. So you can kind of just like, you can step on that and like you can add backstory where you need to. But this is like the first team up movie. You have to introduce a ton of characters and you're not going to have a ton of time to do it. So you're going to have to rely very heavily on the camera work and the composition to tell that story for you. And it does a really good job because you don't get really anything from Xavier's backstory other than we were childhood friends. He helped me build Cerebro. That's about it. And you get obviously the opening scene for Magneto, but the rest is like Wolverine and Rogue, a little bit backstory. That's it. Yeah. But you still feel like you very much know these characters, Magneto and Xavier specifically.
Yeah. It's well balanced, and I do remember Bryan Singer, the director of this film, had previously directed The Usual Suspects. That was probably his biggest high-profile thing before this, and that's an ensemble film. And so that was one of the selling points for this. Was like, this is a guy who knows how to balance characters and introduce a lot of characters all at once, and you have to get their backstories out there really quickly in a natural way. And again, that's kind of repeated here. So it makes sense that Bryan Singer, with all his many, many faults, was a good choice, at least to set off this first film.
We didn't know the faults at the time.
No, we did not. We just know, like, Usual Suspects is amazing. I want to watch that again. There is one other thing that I want to point out, just a sequence that I really, really liked, just because of the editing and the variety of shots. And it's near the beginning, and it's the scene where Wolverine detects that Sabretooth is in the trees and he's smelling him. And as best I could, I kind of cataloged what the shots are. And that you have this first person view of the trees. And then you have the close up of Logan's eyes. And then you have this extreme low angle looking up at him as his claws extend. And then you have another extreme close up of his eyes. And it's just all these things bouncing back. It's like you can see that all of his senses are fully heightened as he's picking this up. And it's so quick. And I love it. It's showing, not telling. He's not like, I can smell something out there. He doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a brilliant way to kind of illustrate Wolverine's powers.
The other kind of a similar scene, but maybe a little faster paced, that I was going to mention is right after. I guess it's right after that, chronologically. But he's in the mansion, right? And Jean Grey is poking him with a needle, and he like quickly sits up and then runs out. And he runs out into the mansion, and you get like a 360 shot, like it spins around Logan. And that camera is just like constantly moving, but he is using all of his senses. Like you can tell he's using like his hearing and his smell and things like that. So you're kind of getting like the double dose of this guy's powers. Like he has heightened senses and he's going to use them to his advantage. And yeah, I think both those scenes kind of in succession, help build that character quite a bit. I do wonder though, in the year 2000, so I can't figure this out because I grew up X-Men, everything X-Men. I wonder how many people going to that movie didn't know Wolverine. Like who goes in there and is like, who's this guy? What's his powers? Yeah, because it's a good question. I mean, I was in my mid-20s. I'm older than you, but I had grown up and I'd watched the cartoon on the 92 cartoon and loved that. So I knew the characters. I mean, I was looking for, okay, where's Beast? I was looking for the cast from that and was Beast
little bit
is in there for like a half a second. He's on the TV in the bar.
I think is that the second one?
Oh, that's the second one. Dang it.
That's the second one.
You're right.
But
right.
oh, there's Jubilee, who was one of the characters that was always on the cartoon. She is a brief, no dialogue cameo. So looking for those, kind of doing it like a checklist, got this. But I knew who Wolverine was. And so yes, this fits who Wolverine is. But yeah, that's a good question. And I was also struck by the fact that, I mean, that's the senses, the heightened senses is a thing that we don't talk about with Wolverine too much anymore. It's mainly just dude's got claws and, the healing factor.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see, because I don't remember. When we watch X2 and Last Stand, are we going to see those powers emphasized again?
Yeah, how often are they going to remind the audience?
Yeah. So anything else on cinematography before we move on to sound?
No.
Okay. So yeah, sound effects, soundtrack, vocal sounds. What kind of things did you notice from the soundtrack from this film?
So part of me wonders, we're going to talk a lot about X-Men 92 or the animated series in this. Because from what I understand, Bryan Singer watched that entire series and used it for heavy inspiration for this movie. And there's a lot of things that I wonder, for instance, the sound of Wolverine's claws. Would he have had a different sound? Because it's very reminiscent of the 92 shink noise. How would he have imagined that differently if not for the animated series? Because in this movie, that sound is iconic. Anyone could hear that sound of Wolverine's claws coming out, and you're done for. You know what that is. And that very first time you see his claws come out, when he is in the bar and he holds it up to the guy's neck, and you see him come out, and you hear the sound of. I'm sure somebody is just grinding two swords together or something to make that sound.
It's reminiscent for me too.
Yeah, that is such a wonderful noise.
Yes.
I love it so much. I mean, even now, 20-ish years later, you still hear that in movies and you're like, yeah, let's go. Let's do this. So, I mean, he hit it out of the park right there. And then just generally, the sound, the like pulsating orbish noise when Magneto kind of like enters an area, almost like sound stops except for the orby noise. And then as he's bending metal, and you can just hear all the like. I can't do the noise. I'm not a sound effects guy, but
yeah, I can hear the chink, 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 like when he's walking on the bridge or whatever, or making the bridge as he's walking.
That is fantastic. And whoever did the sound for this film, you had your job cut out for you, but you did a fantastic job. I have IMDb open. I guess I could look it up, but I'm not going to.
You could. I'm wondering if it's Gary. If it's Gary Hacker. That would be my guess. While you're doing that, I also had the unsheathing and the sheathing, because it sounds like it's a natural, as much as it can be in a mutant movie, natural sound, but somebody had to make that up, which is amazing to me. But I also had, like, the first really big thing that I wrote down was some of the stuff again from Auschwitz with that heavy rain and the thunder. But then especially, I can hear right now the metal gates twisting when Eric is reaching for his family. Like, that is such a just gut-wrenching sound.
Yeah, and then that coupled with like his mom screaming in the background.
Yes.
Man, is there a better opening to a film? Like, that is just so good.
Yeah, it's really, really, really great. But on the other side, and kind of the fun side, the Wolverine Sabretooth fight up on top of the Statue of Liberty, when it gets down into the statue, and then a Cyclops blasts Sabretooth out of the statue. Before he hits the boat, it is absolute silence. So you have this loud explosion, and then he falls, and it's a lengthy fall, and the whole time there's no sound. I'm just like nothing, and then bang. So I just thought that was a pretty great use of. Sometimes lack of sound is really pretty effective, and I thought that was pretty great.
Agreed. Man, that Statue of Liberty fight, I got some opinions on that when we get there later.
Sweet. I did want to say too, we are going to mention the cartoon a ton. Before I forget, because it could have been later, but you know that the trucker who drops Rogoff, that actor is the voice actor for Beast, which is fantastic. I had to throw that in before I forget. But I do want to say that I do like the score a lot. I didn't really pick out leitmotifs other than like the main theme, which to me is very reminiscent of the cartoon theme in a lot of ways. It feels like it's almost kind of like in reverse.
Oh, see, I disagree a lot. Okay,
go for it.
A lot. No, keep going.
I just finishing. Like it reminded me a lot of it. It felt like, and I'm not a music major, but it felt like it was using a lot of the same, notes, and it was doing the same thing for me. But it felt like it was kind of inverting what the cartoon had done.
Okay, maybe we do agree then. I just misunderstood because, so I have that here in my notes. Like that cartoon theme is so freaking iconic.
Yeah.
And even more so today, like it's become like a cultural thing. Even when the sequel to the cartoon came out, like they redid that opening music.
Yeah, and super iconic for sure.
It's super good. Even to the point where like this is before X-Men 97 came out. Like I would play like soundtracks in my room while students are listening or working, and students who were not even remotely alive when that show first came out could still like tell me what that is from. Anyway, so the X-Men theme, like the opening credits theme, and it plays I think towards the end of the movie as well.
It's the first time you hear it, yeah.
It does sound similar, I think, in some situations, but it sounds so much more like mysterious and foreboding and like almost like suspenseful. It gave me like very strong, and I don't know why. I was trying to like pick out why. Maybe you can figure it out. You're better at this music stuff. It give me strong like Jason Bourne trilogy vibes, like that level of mystery, spy novel, spy thriller.
Well, so I immediately had to go to, and I knew it was Michael Kamen, but I needed a refresher on like what he had done. So he did the first 3 Die Hard movies. He did Highlander, Prince of Thieves, but also did License to Kill. So there's a Bond film, Lethal Weapon series. So there's a distinct style there, I think. that kind of fits kind of what you're talking about. It is superhero, but it's not like a triumphant superhero.
Yeah.
Like, right? It is kind of subversive in that way.
The animated is triumphant for sure.
Yeah.
And this is like wary and suspicious.
It's kind of building
almost
towards something, but not paying off. That's kind of what I was feeling that. There was one piece of diegetic music that I liked and that I did pick up. It's in the Laughlin Bar, and it's Lucinda Williams' "Still I Long for Your Kiss," which while Rogue is sitting there kind of staring at kind of contemplating life and staring at the tip jar, which I thought, I love it when they're kind of heavy-handed and kind of on the nose if you're paying attention. And yeah, she's probably thinking about that quite a bit. She almost killed that dude. He was in a coma for 3 weeks.
That line in there where he takes the tip jar and he moves it. He's like, "You're sticking with water." Like, well, I say that in my family all the time. Like, my kids aren't eating dinner, I'm just like, "You're sticking with water."
Yeah,
they don't think it's funny, but I do, and that's what matters.
Yeah, that's the jar that says "Tipping's not a city in China," right?
Yeah,
beautiful. This film does something, speaking of vocal sounds, moving down that just for a second, does the thing that a lot of films do, that it uses some TV broadcasts for exposition. But I thought did it in a kind of a subtle way, because even in that scene, you have things about the United Nations World Summit. So if you're paying attention, it is mentioned multiple times before you get to the end. So it's kind of foreshadowing. It's been seeding this idea that there's going to be this big event at the end of the movie in New York. So I thought I kind of appreciated that it was obvious if you're looking for it, but if you're not, you didn't even know it was there.
It really, so I like in these oldish movies that we do, I like to go look at and see what, what is his name? Ebert. What's that guy's name? The film reviewer. Roger Ebert. There we go. I like to go and see what he said about the film at the time, because he was, I feel like he was the de facto movie reviewer. So I always go and look at what he said. And he made fun of that a little bit in his review about saying, "Oh, it is so convenient that there happens to be like a world summit next to the Statue of Liberty." I'm like, of course, so the movie can happen. Why are you knocking symbol. That?
That's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, what? I don't understand his review.
Where else would you have it? Like, if you'd have it like in New York, or in another city with a really big building, that's where the battle would be.
Yeah, he also knocked the idea that, like, why is it Magneto's master plan to make more people mutants and make them more powerful if they're his enemies? I'm like, it's so that they have a common plight, you dummy. Like, he's trying to put them in the same category so that way they understand what he's going through. Ebert, I don't know. I don't know what you're doing, man.
I'm going to skip down to something I had from like Final Thoughts, because when I did some research on that. Let me see if I can find out which person it was. Well, even if I can't, the point of it was, according to this one film critic, was essentially kind of like Constantine with Christianity, because you get and that's Magneto kind of talks about that. It's like, if we get the leaders of the world to be mutants, then they will take up our cause.
Mm-hmm.
So
you must have missed that line.
It makes a lot of sense, actually. His plan makes a lot, because again, he's not, and he even still, Magneto is going to be probably still the most powerful mutant on the planet. Like, he's not worried about his place in that world.
While we're in that, and kind of while we're coming off of Xavier and Magneto's, I don't know, like, rivalry, I do like Wolverine makes a good point, and it seems to kind of tick Magneto off, and it's one of my favorite lines of the movie. But Wolverine says to him, like, "Oh, you're so full of crap. If you were so righteous, you'd be in that thing. Like, why are you killing Rogue?" I love that line, because it kind of does, like I said, he's the anti-hero. He's set up as the anti-hero, and then Wolverine kind of calls him out on his crap.
Yes.
And it kind of irks him, but he doesn't really respond. He kind of just keeps going. And I love that. It kind of makes you think as an audience, like, oh, shoot. Yeah. Okay. This guy's got some issues. If you're really so righteous, what are you doing killing this girl? Anyway.
No, I love that you pulled that out, because he really does call him on his hypocrisy there. Because up until that point, it's been our cause, but you're not willing to actually lay down your life for that. as much as you could have.
Especially because, I mean, if all things being fair, he's an older guy. If someone's going to sacrifice themselves, like, he's got less time on the planet than she does.
Yeah. So we've kind of alluded to performances just being great across the board. I don't think there's anything in this I would look at that stands out. Like, most of them not huge. Like, even Halle Berry wasn't that well known at the time. When Patrick Stewart was a TV actor, and Ian McKellen, like, he had done, like, even Lord of the Rings hadn't quite come out yet. So he'd been around for a while, but he wasn't like as well known as he would be after, for the next few years. So
yeah,
solid cast versus like star-studded cast, at least initially. But like you'd said, like, the way they're cast so well, they're like, yeah, that's who I think of when I think of that character in film.
I don't, as much as I do think of these characters when I think of X-Men in film, Halle Berry, well, I'll say their movie names because I don't know all the actors, but so like Jean Grey and Cyclops and Storm, I do feel like it might have been the writing, but they did feel they felt very flat. Like there wasn't a lot of depth to them, especially Storm.
Yeah, she doesn't have a lot to do in this.
She doesn't have a whole lot to do, but even her line delivery sometimes is kind of flat and unconvincing. And then I feel like Cyclops would be such a difficult character to play. He gets a bad rap so often. And X-Men 97 has been fantastic to Cyclops. But I feel like in most other TV or movies and cartoons, it's hard. He's got a lot of depth, and it's hard to like portray that when your character doesn't get a lot of screen time. So I think he got shafted just a little bit. Also, I feel like as an actor, it would be really hard to portray your character as having any emotion if no one can ever see your eyes. Like that's that's right. It's gonna make you struggle.
That is rough. So you pulled out one particular part of dialogue. Do you have any other lines that you want to bring up before we? One or two? I mean, because I'll just pull out one that I think it's not a big line, but I think that there's a lot in it. Where when Rogue has just met Wolverine and she asks about the claws, right? She says, when they come out, does it hurt? And the way he just says every time is just so heavy.
Yeah, and coincidentally, I think of that every time his claws come out. I'm just like, ouch, poor guy. Ooh, yeah, ow, poor guy. Yeah. This movie is not. It's modern day comic book films lean heavily into the comedy. Like it would feel weird if they weren't comedic, but this one, very little comedy. It's very serious. And I mean, I think it works. Like there's a lot of deeper stuff in the film. Like it's way more serious in its tone. So I feel like normally we talk about like, oh, this is my favorite funny line. Not a whole lot.
No,
not a whole lot. Right here.
I remember having that conversation too afterward. Like, well, what's some of the funny lines? And they're like, there really isn't any. Like, there's a few that are memorable. Like, the most memorable line from this movie is unfortunately probably one of its worst. What is this? You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? Same thing happens to everything else. It's awful. Like, why? Just don't say anything. Just zap them and be done with it.
Yeah, I hate that line. What were they thinking there?
One thing I do like, though, and I really like it, too, because they repurposed it for the trailer for X2. We have the conversation between Magneto and Charles Xavier when Magneto's in the plastic cage, the jail, plastic cell. And Magneto says, does it ever wake you in the middle of the night, the feeling that one day they will pass that foolish law or one just like it and come for you and for your children? And he says, it does indeed. And he says, what do you do when you wake up to that? And I love what Charles says here. He says, I feel a great swell of pity for the poor soul who comes to that school looking for trouble. Which is like, and it's not funny, but it's also like, that's so badass. He's like, my kids are ready.
The favorite bit of dialogue, I'm not going to quote the whole thing, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners probably know it. The interaction between Magneto and Xavier right outside of the train station, where there's all those police officers out there, and just that is one of the few moments where you really get to see like both of their powers. Like you see how easily Xavier can just like take over Sabretooth, hold Magneto by the neck, and at the same time you see Magneto, lifting up the cars, flipping them over, pulling everyone's guns away, and just, the whole line, "You Homo sapiens and your guns." Like,
oh yeah,
that is amazing. And then what does he say? "Care to press your luck, Charles? I don't think I can stop them all." Like, that is such a wonderful,
chilling.
Like,
oh, so good.
Yeah, it's like a merciful threat, and it is so well done. And I love that Xavier is like speaking through Sabretooth to Magneto. Oh, it's so tense, and you can like feel the years of friendship there, but also just I don't know, like they don't want to fully take the gloves off because they're still at the end of the day friends.
Yeah.
Great scene.
So good. We've talked about body language and facial expressions a little bit already. Like I immediately had the whole sequence from the beginning with young Eric and his parents and all of those things. But the one thing that I really want to point out, and I don't think I noticed it on first couple of viewings, and I think I picked it up in like the audio commentary, but Jean's face after she gets hit by the blast wave, where she gets her eyes get kind of big and she kind of, I guess, like a stuttered breath. And
I'm sorry, wait, what
really
blast wave?
At the end on Liberty Island.
Oh,
so
like
she gets hit. Yeah.
Okay.
The magnetic wave from Magneto's device, the radiation wave, I should say. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful little blink and you miss it moment, unless you're paying attention and you're looking for it, because it is absolutely, and this was confirmed in the commentary, it's foreshadowing for Dark Phoenix. It's setting up some things from the next movie. And they do talk about it. When we get to X2, they'll talk about it in that opening scene, how she's been different since Liberty Island. So, yeah, it's quick, but if you're looking for it, I am
ashamed. I am ashamed I never noticed that.
Right after Logan breaks that thing, like it peters out, the whole thing kind of just fizzles out, and then it cuts right to Jean's face. And you can see that she's like, something happened. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's a great little bit there.
Yeah.
So we got to talk about the costumes,
which is probably the lowest point of this film.
Yeah.
I blame The Matrix. What do you blame?
I mean, The Matrix was an influence on this. That's true. I mean, it came out the year before. Like in my research, that was like, hey, this is kind of like The Matrix. That was a big hit. They wore black leather. Let's wear black leather.
Let's wear black leather.
They're not ready for it. I was watching a documentary today, just a few minutes ago, before we went on air, about Superman Returns, and that was actually what the sequel to Superman Returns would be. That was the premise. But they were talking about that Bryan Singer at that, at the point where we're making this was like the audience isn't ready for it. By the time we got to Superman Returns, it's like, no, it's this, because we'd also had Spider-Man between the two. But yeah, the black leather. I mean, it's if you're looking for it, it's kind of back to body language for a second. When they get out of the X-Jet and they have to kind of clamber over that brick wall, if you're looking carefully, like they have a hard time getting over it.
No, I actually read when I was getting ready for this episode that some of them couldn't get over that wall. It was like a 2-foot wall or something, and they couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it.
Oh man. Well, what would you prefer, Craig? Yellow spandex? Come on.
That's the great thing about when we're going to reference Deadpool and Wolverine, like probably every movie that we do during this series, that when you get that 24-year payoff.
Yeah, but so here's the thing. I worry that if they would have done costumes, they would have been bad. And that would have...
That's a good point.
Like, the audience probably wasn't ready, and they wouldn't have looked very good. Like, I don't think they had figured out how to make superhero costumes yet. Like, we don't get good superhero costumes in a movie. Well...
I mean, I liked Batman 89's costume.
I do.
The 92 one, I even liked it better.
Okay, but think how serious, like, Batman is tonally. Yes. And then this, you're going to have, like, a serious movie with bright yellow and Cyclops
different colors.
Bright,
because even that they went away from the blue and the gray, right? They went to black, essentially black leather. So I guess I recall my point to that. I didn't really make my point actually. No, you're right about the yellow. I think
the MCU, like one of my favorite I love costume design. Like that, it's a make or break. I've said this many times on this podcast. It's a make or break for me. The costumes every single time. And the MCU like absolutely nails that. Like you can make the most ridiculous looking costumes like Captain America look cool. And
some of his costumes, yeah. Some of them are
well,
trash.
I think the only one that doesn't work is the Avengers one.
Please, yes. Yeah, that's the one I was going to go with too.
But, I mean, that one, they intentionally said, oh, we made this one to be a symbol, like,
yeah,
you know, it was
but for the
supposed to be
most
out
part,
there.
yes, his costume is kind of ridiculous, and they made it work.
They made
Almost
it work.
at all.
And I feel like the MCU, at least the first couple phases, do a really, really good job of that. And I just don't think X-Men in the year 2000 was ready to do that, so they went to the safe bet of black leather, which is also boring.
Yeah, kind of. So a couple of other things that they changed. Obviously, Mystique is basically naked in this film, other than some prosthetics. And initially, I was like, "That's really what's your purpose in that? Are you just doing that to be salacious or whatever?" But in this view, I was like, it actually kind of makes sense, right? Because she's making clothing out of her skin as well, right? So, like, if there is an internal logic to it, like she would be that way so that she could take on any costume of any character that she's portraying. So. It's not like you're ditching a jumpsuit all of a sudden and doing this.
Well, and I do like how the First Class films kind of back that up. Like, she's doing it at Magneto's behest because she is proud of her mutant ability. Like, she is showing off her mutant ability, which is easy for Magneto to say, who doesn't have like an outward manifestation of his ability. Yep. But, yeah, I do feel bad for that actress because I think I read it took like 9 hours a day to get all that on.
Yeah.
Holy cow, that's got to be terrible.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to point out. So they weren't ready to do, and maybe we weren't as an audience ready to do the full-on comic accurate costumes, but somehow they struck a balance with Wolverine's hair where it's almost ridiculous.
But it kind of works.
Like you wouldn't go out in public like that. But on him, it works.
It's reminiscent of a Canadian who sleeps in his trailer and wakes up every morning, and that's what he looks like.
Looks cozy.
Like
yeah.
And I think in X-Men, X-Men 2, X2, whatever, he gets like the flare up on the sides just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And then by X3, it's like full on flared up. And then the next time we see him in X-Men Origins, it's down a little bit more. So like you kind of see a progression and then they dial it back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, he kind of retains it all throughout because even in Logan, which is way more serious than any of these other films, he still has the furl up, the iconic Wolverine hair.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is an interesting.
I was struck by and I know some of I think the facial hair is makeup too. Like I think because he was such a late addition to which is just an amazing story, a late addition to the cast, and so
he was the last one cast. I read of the major actors. That is crazy.
Yeah, when we get down to characters, I have a little bit more about that, but yeah. So it's like they kind of slap together his look for the first one, and then I think it becomes a little bit more natural, a little bit more him by the time you get to even X2.
Yeah. So. I do remember at the time some people complaining because, I mean, as everyone knows now from the Deadpool films, but comic accurate Wolverine is like 5'3", I think, and Hugh Jackman is 6'2", and I remember some people complaining, Hugh Jackman's too big. It's like, you don't want Danny DeVito in there. Like that'd be terrible.
Yeah.
You don't want someone that short. That'd look weird. It works on paper, but not in movies.
Yeah, that's true. So we'll skip down to setting design. I think we've probably covered a lot in that for the last section. Filmed primarily in Canada. Speaking of Wolverine, in Toronto and in Ontario. One thing that I thought was amazing, and I'd seen it again. The director's commentary for this is fantastic, but the Roy Thompson Hall is the building that uses some of it's used for some of the X Mansion interiors, but also right outside the Senate hearing with all the X's in the hallway where Charles and Eric are talking. That's a real location. That's literally what it looks like. They did not build that. So you can imagine being a scouting director and walking up there and being like, scouting locations going, yeah, that's going to be in our film because it fits so perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
I also really liked the cage, like as our introduction to Wolverine, that he's just in this like essentially barbed wire cage.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. That's what Wolverine would be doing.
Yeah. One thing also that I want to talk about was set decoration. You kind of alluded to this already with the X Mansion versus where the Brotherhood's hanging out. But there's two parts to the X Mansion that I thought was really interesting. That everything below is kind of this bluish silver metal. All the walls and everything in the X-Men base under the mansion, it's kind of cold. Like it feels like it would be cold in there. But then upstairs, everything is warm and wood furnishings. And I love how it's so different that you have these two different worlds that live on top of each other.
You know,
that was pretty fascinating.
This movie does really like blue. There's a lot of blue.
Yeah. Cerebro, also very blue, and just a really ridiculously impressive set. And I know they didn't build the entire thing; like they built like half of it or whatever, and like just turn the thing around. But even still, like that is an impressive set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, never mind. We can keep going.
No, that's fine. And Magneto's plastic prison was the last thing I had with that. And before I talked about props, but what do you want to say?
Oh no, I was going to bring up the plastic prison as well. I mean, we obviously get a lot more of that in X2, but that's such a big set that I feel like would not be a whole lot of fun to build. No. So I'm glad they did, even for like, I don't know, what is that, like a 3-minute shot at the end?
Yeah,
and they got some use out of it in X2, but yeah, I love how that looks. I love the isolation of that. And for a character like Magneto that's so befitting of like, that would be a pretty harsh punishment for that guy. Someone who is used to like pulling the strings and being in charge. And now he's completely isolated, both, like actually isolated. He's on an island, like the middle of a great void. I don't know. They did a good job with the design of that, for sure.
So I'm looking at what I had for props, and this is actually where I had the thing about Magneto's mutant making machine, about the Constantine thing, and it was author David Hughes. So I want to make sure I attribute his analysis of that to him. But the things that I really liked about this, like Logan's dog tags and the cigar, again, like super like there are certain things, obviously his height not comic accurate, but some of these other things are super distinctive. Although I think like on the dog tag in this film says Wolverine, and I'm thinking like, doesn't it say Logan on something else? I can't remember, but I'll be looking for that later on.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I'm sure he fought a lot of different wars. Maybe he had multiples.
That's true.
That's my headcanon. I'm sticking with it.
I mean, he did. He definitely did that. I really like the pin table map, where they're kind of setting up the plan for that. There was an article I was reading about that. How they did that in 2000 was very difficult.
Tell me
CGI
how'd they do that?
Well, that's a lot of it's
CGI?
practical. No, some of it's practical. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Magneto's helmet, I think that's one of my favorites because that one is used heavily in the prequel films as well. Like they kind of got it right the first time. I mean, it changes throughout, but it fits and like frames Ian McKellen's face really, really well.
Yeah. It doesn't look ridiculous.
It doesn't look
could
too
easily
ridiculous.
Look ridiculous.
I do feel like in X-Men Apocalypse, it looks ridiculous. It looks really stupid in that movie. Again, costume design.
Yeah.
Bad costume.
So, characters. This is the part where we talk about, yes, Hugh Jackman being Super Late Edition. Did you know that Russell Crowe was offered the role? I did not know that.
I did know that.
Yeah, he recommended Jackman. But I did know about Doug Ray Scott, who's the villain in Mission Impossible 2, which is a trash movie. That poor guy could not get out of that to do Wolverine. And then
forever regret it.
Yeah.
I found this out recently thanks to random internet algorithms. Hugh Jackman was a teacher before he was an actor. Like there's like video of him in the class like teaching students.
Nice.
Can you
He's just
imagine
like us,
being
Justin.
like, "Hey, Wolverine"? All right, I'm gonna quit my job and I'm gonna become an actor.
That's cool.
Just kidding.
I think I knew I was gonna feel this way, but watching this on this view, he's so skinny in this film. Like he's not. I mean, he's not scrawny, but compared to what he is later, and almost immediately, even in the next film, he's so much skinnier. But he is exactly the same a-hole that he is in Deadpool Wolverine. He becomes. I think I mentioned this to you off air, that he becomes kind of paternal in a way, even in the next film. But in this one, through most of it, he's the same a-hole that we meet in the bar in Deadpool Wolverine, which I love.
It is funny though that like Hugh Jackman for so many films like X-Men Origins and then Days of Future Past and now Deadpool, he is known for like his physique, right? Like he's like this ripped guy, and then you watch X-Men 1 and he's kind of like this scrawny, not well defined. Like he's not fat or anything, but he's not a whole lot of muscle mass there. And it's so funny to see that. Like, oh man, you look way different. Poor guy, that's so much work.
Yeah. We did talk about Patrick Stewart. I mean, yeah, even that opening scene, I was like, oh my gosh, that's just absolute perfect casting. Same thing with Ian McKellen, just two legends. Just freaking fantastic. I can't imagine anybody else in those roles.
I used to get these magazines in the mail. They're called like Wizard. I can't remember what they're called exactly. Wizard something. I still have it, but I found an old one I had from like 1995, and they did like a theoretical fan cast like in the magazine, and they listed who should play each of these roles, and Patrick Stewart was in there as Xavier. Even in like 1995, people were like, "Yeah, Patrick Stewart. He's the guy for this." Because I mean, he's super bald. He looks just like Xavier. Like,
yeah, and the character's not that different from Jean-Luc Picard, really. It's pretty similar.
Pretty similar.
Yeah. Some other like first offerage. I don't know how to say this. People who were offered the part before the people who actually made the movie. Jean Grey, Charlize Theron was offered the part, but turned it down.
I can see that. Yeah,
I could absolutely see that. Jim Caviezel was going to play Scott Summers, Cyclops.
Jim Caviezel, who is that?
Dude, he's Jesus.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah,
Jesus.
But he was Frequency.
I'm like, why do I know? Yeah,
couldn't get out of Frequency. Yeah,
which is a great film.
Yeah, exactly.
I love Count of Monte Cristo.
This is the one that blew my mind, and really lets you know like how much of a big star Halle Berry wasn't quite yet. That Janet Jackson was apparently offered the part for Storm.
I could see it. In prepping for this, I guess I have not fact checked this, but I read it on the internet, so it's true.
Yes.
Michael Jackson was gunning for the part of Professor X.
I heard that.
But I guess apparently nobody like actually took him seriously in that request. But I'm like, I can't even remotely physically, like thematic, like the way he looks, the way he acts. I can't. No part of me thinks Michael Jackson would work.
Sorry, MJ. No.
Like,
yeah.
What is going on there?
No, that doesn't work. Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking through Anna Paquin as Rogue. Tyler Mane. I wish Tyler Mane would have played Sabretooth in X-Men Origins Wolverine. Like, come on. Just for consistency. I mean, I believe Shriver's fine in that, but
I don't love him. I don't love him as Sabretooth.
Really?
Well, I think he suffers from the same problem. The physicality, yeah, but I mean, same problem as like Cyclops and Storm and Jean Grey is like they don't really have a lot to do or say.
Yeah, that's why he cast a wrestler in that part.
Well, and with Tyler Mane as Sabretooth too, like he's so covered up by hair, it's hard. I don't know, it's hard to get through.
Yeah. Ray Park as Toad. I remember that being it's the dude from Phantom Menace, and he does the little twirl with the pipe thing at the end.
Like he learned that from the Star Wars thing.
That's the thing from the other thing. Yeah, Rebecca Romaine Stamos as Mystique, who endured a lengthy makeup job. That's about all I had for that. As far as Hero's Journey goes, that's not really that. I mean, it's just more of an introduction to the team. It's not really an origin story for anybody, which is fine. We talked about this. Corey and I talked about this with Blade, that you don't always have to do an origin story. and we appreciated the fact that that was not, and this isn't either. Like, it's Wolverine and Rogue's introduction into this existing team.
Yeah.
But it didn't have to be an origin story. Like, and that worked just fine. You can still, introduce this world to all of us, and we don't have to, and mentioned this too. Like, X-Men is a little bit of a different thing because, hey, they're just born with their powers. You don't have to show them getting them or whatever. But yeah, you don't always have to do an origin story.
And I appreciate that, because origin stories are fun. Like, obviously, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, that's great. Batman Begins, that's great.
Yeah.
But I feel like as audiences, we've been saturated with comic book films. We know where these guys came from. We don't need a whole movie about it. Let's just move it right along.
Yep. As far as world building goes, we kind of talked about this before, that it's basically our world, but just, they say it's in the near future.
Yeah.
Which I think is a brilliant way of doing it. They don't have
so vague. You'll never pin it down.
Yeah. Just in the near future. Near future from 2000, near future from now. Whatever. It's our world that just happens to have mutants who have cropped up in the last little bit. And apparently not that long ago, like that they become public.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of the way
they kind of go back and forth. Obviously, the X-Men timeline is a huge mess, and nothing makes sense, and continuity is not a thing between actors and timelines, and like, go try and make sense of it. You'll probably like have yourself a PhD thesis or something to write at the end of it. But where's I going with that?
The timeline and stuff.
Nope, I lost it.
Oh,
See?
Okay. Well, I mentioned this earlier. It's fine.
I feel like that was a good point. Now it's gone.
If it was great, it'll come back. We talked about the self-containedness as well, that it's its own thing, and I think that's really smart. Even though they have the rights, and the 20th Century Fox has the rights to Fantastic Four and Daredevil at this point, and don't ever put those together. I know that when we get to Fantastic Four, I know there's a deleted scene where Hugh Jackman has a cameo as like a thing that Mr. Fantastic does. It's pretty easy to find. But it's such a big universe. You don't need to. And at the time, like, the whole shared cinematic universe was just not a thing people were apparently interested in, even if you had the rights. So I think that's fascinating that doesn't really happen until, the MCU. And even Feige's a producer on this film. Feige's been, working on Marvel films forever. So you wonder if he's just in the background, like, chomping at the bit. Like, why don't we bring in Spider-Man here? Can we do something to get...
Yeah, I feel like
they didn't have the rights for Spider-Man, but,
we could have been interested. If you threw, like, Daredevil into this, I would have watched that. Daredevil would be weird with mutants, but you get my point.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've heard Kevin Smith talk about this, too, and I felt the same way, like, in Batman and Robin, which is a trash movie. But when Clooney says... It is. And when Clooney says, this is why Superman works alone. Like, that was just that throwaway line of Superman exists in this universe was such a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you had the rights to both of those characters and you just sat on it.
We're just so hungry for all those connections.
Yeah, apparently. So, final thoughts on X-Men, Justin.
It holds up. It's a great film, and it holds up in a way that I think it'll continue to hold up, because it deals with themes that are not unique to the year 2000. They are not unique to just the comic book franchise. I mean, it's about racism and prejudice, or I guess however you want to look at that. I mean, you could pull a lot of different things out about that, but yeah, it's great. I'm glad it's not a comedic movie. I'm glad it's a little bit. We didn't really talk a lot about this, but I do it. The film is slow. It's a slow film. There's not a ton of action.
That's true.
And the action that you do get isn't all that great. I mean, and you could chalk a lot of that up to maybe the time period that it was made. But if you look at Blade, like, Blade has a lot of action sequences. This does not. Because that wasn't the point. The point was, like, world building and character development.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I'm pretty sure they went into it knowing that, this is going to be a franchise, it's going to be a trilogy. So I'm glad they took it slow, because it completely withstands the test of time. I think a good, like, foil against this would be X-Men 3, where they kind of jumped the shark a little bit, and it's like, you went too fast, you did too much too quickly, and that movie sucks. I mean, that movie has a lot of problems, but it's not as well paced as this, and it's great. It's a great movie.
No, and I looked a little bit ahead at run times. This one is under 2 hours, right? It's like an hour and 45 minutes, and X2 is like 2 hours and 13 minutes, I think, and then X3 Last Stand is about this same length as the first movie. And so you talk about pacing issues and how this is allowed to be a slow burn, and that is absolutely not. And they're basically the same runtime, and I think that's a fascinating contrast. And we'll talk about that at length when we get to X3. But yeah, like that's another thing about the sign of the times too. In 2000, a superhero movie did not need to be 2.5 hours to 3 hours long. You could tell your whole story and get in and out in 2 hours. And
I don't think audiences were like conditioned for that either.
Yeah.
Not quite yet. I feel like Lord of the Rings probably ushered that in a bit. But
sure. Yeah, I think 2 hours was like the longest that you'd get most of the time.
Yeah.
Star Wars was Phantom Menace here before 2 hours. Do you know what this is? This says the first Stan Lee cameo is in this film.
Wow.
Yeah, on the beach there. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
But I absolutely agree. I think it absolutely holds up. Like I said, the characterization of Wolverine, which again, it's what a genius stroke of casting. Just Hugh Jackman's still doing it till he's 90.
Till he's 90.
They you're 90. They nailed it with this one, because it's the same guy.
It's funny. There has been like zero call for him to step down from that role. Like you've had it like, people talking about Daniel Radcliffe and Henry Cavill like taking up the mantle, but that was only because Hugh Jackman said he was done with the role at Logan. No one was like, "Hey, get out of there, make room for someone else." Everyone's like, "Nah, you're good." The Wolverine doesn't like age at the same rate, but you're good. Like I don't care how old you get, you're gonna keep playing Logan. Yeah. Oh man, so good.
Nice. So I think that's it. So we're going to get out of here. And as we close, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on X, Instagram, and Facebook. Email us at readingbetweenreels@gmail.com or use the SpeakPipe app on our website. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and review us on iTunes or Spotify. And our next episode, we're going back to the Blade universe. That's right. Our next entry in Marvel Before the MCU series is Blade 2. So send us an email or voicemail about your favorite moments from Blade 2, and we'll share it on the next episode.